So, well, you know what also isn't trash,
Bikini.
guys, is Bikini Kill, who, like, I feel like we've been building up to this album for quite a while, which I'll kind of get into when I give my take on different stuff. But in case you were trying to follow along with us, this is called The First Two Records. It is not a full-length LP. It is a combination of two EPs.
Do we have music that we're doing,
Well,
John?
that's what I'm getting to right now.
Oh, okay.
So
I'm sorry.
giving context. But, well, this one goes nicely with that interruption right there. Matt, in the montage, we heard Suck My Left One. Now we're going to hear Rebel Girl. So Matt, after that one, try to beat that.
As soon as that title, that song came up the first time I listened to it, I just started laughing. I was like, that's one of my favorite song titles of all time.
There are some fantastic song titles on this.
Sure are.
Yes.
All right, the CD version of the first two records by Bikini Kill comes in at number 4,843 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 474 in 1994, 30,169 of all time. It's Bikini Kill's third highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, behind 1996's Reject All American, and 1993's Pussy Whipped. This record did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Bikini Kill is ranked number 4,041 overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
Well, Bikini Kill, big time. I think All Music described them as a point band of early 90s Riot Girl, which I enjoyed. But yes, they are, in many ways, they are the Riot Girl band. There are other ones, but they're sort of the one that I think is, at least I think of first when I think of Riot Girl. The group is four folks, three women and one male. The three women are Kathleen Hanna, Toby Vale, and Kathy Wilcox. They all went to Evergreen College in Olympia, Washington, which was described as basically like a super liberal enclave in the Pacific Northwest. So that's how they end up in the same ecosystem as like the grunge folks and stuff in that area, because it's relatively close to Seattle. I think Toby Vale, if I remember correctly, is the person who came up with Teen Spirit. I think she wrote like Kurt Cobain smells like Teen Spirit from the deodorant or something, I think is the story along the way. I believe she also was not, I think there could be nothing that would be less appropriate for Bikini Kill than describing who they're married to, even though Toby Vale famously dated Kurt Cobain, and even though I think Kathleen Hanna, if I remember correctly, is married to one of the Beastie Boys, if I remember correctly. So, but yes, the three of them all went to Evergreen College, and they published a zine. We talked about zines before, guys. Many moons ago, I wrote for a zine, so like that's my connection right there. But it was a feminist zine, and it was called Bikini Kill. Yeah, that was the name of it. So that's where it came from. Basically, this band was like them coming together and saying, hey, what if like we took the ideas in the zine and like put it to like music? And that is, I think, where it's so similar to hardcore music, right? Because it's similar thing. It's like, it's as much about the movement as it is about the music itself, right? Like, and that's where I think Riot Girl and hardcore have similar intersection points. But the three of them had some musical background, but not a ton. And they decided to put a band together, and they got a gentleman by the name of William Caron, who would be known as Billy Boredom, in the group, and the four of them made Bikini Kill. So Kathleen Hanna was the primary songwriter, and she was the singer. For whatever reason, lots of people, along with sort of their talking about sort of the origins of them being from zine culture, which I think is important to understand Riot Girl, because for me, no music is more connected to zine culture than Riot Girl. I think there's plenty of people listening right now who may be either too old for zine culture or too young for zine culture, but like, here's how I'd describe zines. Like, if you wanted to take Gen X and make it a thing, it would be zines. I think is the best way to describe it. It's a way to connect with a subculture, right, in an area. I
Yeah,
guess in
definitely.
some sense it's like Reddit. Like Reddit sort of functions as like
Yeah,
a
or like
more accessible zine culture. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, or like message boards, or just something you're passionate about in printed form,
Yeah,
essentially.
this was also
Very
like early,
DIY.
yeah, early internet era too. So like in
Yep.
the early 90s you're getting like Usenet groups and stuff like that. So in some ways I romanticize this a little bit because I know some people hate the concept of gatekeepers, but having some level of gatekeepers means that people are passionate about the scene, which comes with pluses and minuses, I think, along the way. Anyway, that's a separate conversation altogether. The other thing that people like to mention, and the only thing I can think of is because there is sort of a sex positivity mixed with like sex as weapon element to a lot of Bikini Kill songs, is that for a while Kathleen Hanna was a stripper. It comes up constantly for some reason. I don't know if it's because it's sort of at odds to some people of what the images that they're seeing here, but like I think it actually kind of fits in some ways because it's like about reclaiming your sexuality. And if I think there's even a song on this album where they're like, um if I want to sell my body, right, like I'm allowed to and stuff.
Yeah,
And you
yeah,
could
he says
definitely
that.
see, yeah, you could definitely see that being something, you think of that as like prostitution, but it could just as easily be, like if I want to like dress up or strip or something like that to make money, then it's my right, you don't get to tell me, right? Anyway,
Or
that
even
comes up
just
a
like
lot.
wanting to sleep with who you want to sleep with. Like,
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, and there's a lot of that too. Or like, I kind of want to sleep with you, but also I fucking hate you. And
yeah,
like, there's a lane for men to be able to do that. Like, hey, I slept with this beautiful dumb bitch, right? Like, and I'm using terms they would use, right? Not like terms I would use. And like, I want to sleep with like a good looking asshole. You know what I mean? And we saw some of that. Well, I won't get too much into my take, but like we're seeing an interesting mix of women reclaiming that narrative at this point in time. Anyway, they released a initial recording called Revolution Girl Style. Like it's funny, every single one of these albums is like exactly what you'd expect a song in like Riot Girl to be named. It's kind of amazing. So, Revolution Girl Style comes out. It was released as a demo cassette, which made me laugh. Like you don't see that very
wow,
often
yeah,
anymore. And they signed with Kill Rock Stars, which was a record label based in Olympia, and they released an EP. Part of that is on this, in true sort of style that you would expect. Fugazi's Ian MacKaye is the person who produced that EP, and you hear some of the songs from that on this. And it's basically the first cassette put onto CD, pretty much, is the best way to put it. And then the band issued another recording called Yeah, 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 Yeah. So interesting there, right, in terms of how that would come there. A split 12-inch released with a British group named Huggy Bear, and it's like a dual recording. Like on one side is Huggy Bear stuff, and on the other side is Bikini Kill stuff. So two of the big Riot Girl bands. They're also bumping up against Joan Jett, who they sort of said was the spiritual, sort of the spiritual like forefather or foremother, I guess, of this
hmm,
style of music. And she actually ends up producing a single for them, and Kathleen Hanna writes a song for her album. And this all leads to their first LP proper, as mentioned before, 1994's Pussy Whipped, which shows not just Kathleen Hanna writing songs, but also Kathy Wilcox and Toby Vale. They're all writing songs on this. And they finally released one other album called Reject All American, and then the group disbands in 1998. And then they all do side projects that you may be familiar with. Let's see how well you guys do on this. Um, Kathleen Hanna ends up with a solo project that doesn't sound like a solo project and a band. Do you guys know either of those projects?
no,
Nope.
no,
Okay, the solo project that sounds like a band is the Julie Ruin. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. I am familiar
mm-mm.
with that album. It sounds a little bit different than this. And the band is La Tigre, is the
Oh
band she
yeah,
forms in
okay,
1999, who I think you guys might be
yeah,
a little bit more familiar with. So the other members of the group that aren't Kathleen Hanna go on to form a group called the Frumpies as well in the second part of the decade. So they break up and kind of do their own projects. It doesn't sound like it was like a big acrimonious breakup. They kind of quietly broke up, just kind of on the fly. They didn't announce it necessarily. And along the way, Kathleen Hanna formed a record label in 2014 called Bikini Kill Records, which just reissues their back catalog and associated projects. She did have some health concerns related to Lyme disease as well along the way. And the band has periodically gone out and played as Bikini Kill and also the Julie Ruin as well. So, yeah. There's more, but I didn't want to give too much because I'm going to build some of it into my review of the album as well, because this was an interesting one for me thematically as much as it is musically. But I'll give first take to this to noted woman hater Matt on our podcast to see what he has to say.
Well, since women did this album, of course it sucks. No, it's interesting because I've known the band name Bikini Kill for years, and I don't know where I first heard it. I certainly don't remember hearing any of their stuff, and none of this was familiar to me. But it's kind of, they were just always out there, like hearing of them, but never really being exposed. Listening to it, it's kind of exactly what I thought it was going to be. It reminded me a lot of the Bratmobile Potty Mouth album that we covered, which is also kind of the beginnings of Riot Girl, and certainly you could see probably the most the Riot Girl act that I am probably the biggest fan of, Slater-Kinney. You could certainly hear like the beginnings of, or the influence here for them as well. So I actually, looking at the track listing here, I listened to the extended version, which is 20 tracks as opposed to 13.
I did too one of the times, Matt.
So that's where you get Wonder.
Also.
What's that, Josh? You did?
I listened to the 20-track one also.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the one that came up, but it's just, I'm looking here on Wikipedia, and it says that this was for the re-release expanded tracks, tracks 14 through 20. Notable songs on that list include George Bush is a Pig, I Busted Your Chevy Window, and Fuck Twin Peaks, which all, like, just lots of these, you just look at the titles and they make you laugh. But yeah, man, these are some women that are certainly, well, first of all, it's a very punk, DIY, lo-fi production sounding. Some of the stuff is like live. It seems like it's recorded live, or at least made to feel like it's recorded live. And there's a lot of angst. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of aggression. And there's some really cool guitar riffs in here. I really like the Feels Blind guitar riff. I thought was really good. And I think that, there's just tons of energy here, right? And it's a lot of the songs under 2 minutes long, or, the longest song on here might be 3:45. Looks like Thurston Hearts The Who is 3:45. So in true punk fashion, many of these songs don't last terribly long. And man, the girls are certainly, these women are certainly striking back at like a toxic male culture. Certainly a song like White Boy, like in the introduction there is I don't know where they're getting that clip from. It's probably real.
Like
I don't
interview,
think it's
right?
It's like an interview from a newscast or something like that, or maybe they even just did some interviews and themselves and
asking for it, right?
Yeah, girls are asking for it just by the way that they act and dress, like that. They kind of want it, and then the song is really about like like pushing back against that and in a very angry way, right? It seems like she's screaming at the guy that's that's trying to rape her essentially. So there's some really there's some darker themes on here, but it certainly fits. That you can totally see why it's Riot Girl, right? It's like we're mad as hell and we're not taking this anymore, and we're going to put this out in our music and our shows and our performances and take a stand. So I certainly appreciate it for a lot of those reasons, and like there's a number of songs on here that I did like, but it's also kind of falling in that lane of an album that it's a little hard to listen to in terms of just like it's a lot of aggression for back to back to back. So it's not typically the thing that I go to, but I did enjoy it. I wouldn't say that there was any song on here that I was like, oh my God, I can't stand this, right? I didn't really feel like it was getting into that lane of sometimes where if I'm listening to something that's more hardcore and I'm like, this is borderline unlistenable. That's certainly not the case here. It's just wow, it's intense, right? If you're going to listen to this, you got to kind of buckle up because they're not going to let up really, throughout the record. So I did enjoy it for a genre that's not kind of something that I typically go to, and it's also important, right? I mean, the influence, Bikini Kill themselves might not have sold a ton or been commercial. They certainly probably wouldn't have wanted that, but their tentacles certainly spread out, to lots of other artists that kind of took that empowerment, took that anger, and put it into their music in various ways. So that you're certainly thankful that there are acts like this that kind of that stepped up and pushed the musical game a little bit further. So yeah, it's a thumbs up for sure. I don't know this. I wouldn't say that there's a ton of re-listenability here for me. Again, this is probably something where I would say this is for me. Let's take 3 or 4 songs from this and kind of put it in like a big playlist, and I can kind of dip my toes in the water rather than go full in, which is probably where my fandom of this would delve towards more than just let me collect their records and listen to them, back to back to back. But certainly a good record, and thumbs up on my end.
Yeah, thumbs up from me too. It's always refreshing to hear this kind of punk rock, angry, aggressive sound from a female perspective, because I do feel like I hear something new, and kind of what they write about and sing about is something you don't hear too often, or at least I don't, and we haven't heard too often up to this point in the podcast with the albums. I definitely thought of Bratmobile, that they're definitely, I think they toured together. I saw when I briefly looked at their bio, so they're of a piece. They're also from the Northwest, right? And so I got the same vibe from them. I feel like Bikini Kill might have a little more musicality or skill in their music, but this is definitely like a lo-fi, like you're right at the front of the stage feeling when you're listening to the album. And I think because I listened to the expanded edition, it seemed like it got lower fi at some point and got even like harder to listen to. Not harder to listen to, but lower quality or like recording live, like you said. I appreciate the issues they talk about, but they're also that they weave like humor into it and stuff that makes me laugh. Like when they're talking about Carnival, and like I think they started with like saying they're giving blowjobs to carnies to get stuff or whatever, and then she's saying like, I need that Motley Crue mirror or something. That made me that made me really laugh. And then just the kind of audacity and assertiveness and confidence to name songs like Suck My Left One and the and Fuck Twin Peaks and things, and George Bush is a Pig. Those are all like titles that are examples. They're not afraid, like hardcore, they're not afraid to be abrasive at times. Like on Liar, I think she's singing, but then the other singer is like screaming, and that was like really kind of off-putting intentionally, and disjarring, but I appreciate what they were going for. I liked Rebel Girl a lot. I had never heard any of their songs before, but I certainly have felt their vibe. And Rebel Girl is kind of like admiring this other girl in the neighborhood and wanting to be her friend. And, she may be like bad, not necessarily like bad news, but she's like different. So, but she kind of is envious of her and wants to befriend her. I appreciated that as well. And like you said, it's short and sweet, and every song's very short. Also, I busted your Chevy window. That's kind of almost like spoken word punk rock or something. That's on probably the expanded edition. It's only a minute long, but
yeah, it is. I don't. There's no music. It is spoken word.
Yeah, I found that like an interesting kind of like avant-garde piece as part of the album, and yeah, there's a lot of interesting material on here, and I thought, if you like punk or hardcore, you should like this. And I feel like it may not be like a re-listenable album too often. I feel like it's still kind of an important seminal work that needs to be, girls especially that are into music, and a lot of people need to be exposed to this type of sound and say, this is like what you can do with music and still be, like rock and roll or punk rock or whatever, and not like sell out or be kind of bland. And so thumbs up for me on this one.
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is that this is I feel like such an interesting intersection point for us, because there's elements, as I mentioned before, of hardcore and things like what Iggy Pop is doing in
Hmm.
performance art that inform this. And also, we now are a lot more literate, I think, in groups that led up to this, whether it be the Raincoats, the Slits, um,
Yep.
X-Ray Specs,
Yep.
right, was another one that
Hmm.
came to mind. And even Kathleen Hanna's singing voice is sort of similar to, uh, I always forget her name. She has like a, there was like a X in it. Like it was an interesting name, the lead singer, but like they have similarities in terms of how they sing. The band X, which has a female male combination, is another
Hmm.
band that sounds like this a little bit. They mentioned that Joan Jett was the spiritual forefathers. You could hear a little bit of Runaways in this. I think my takeaway with this is the lens of what I think of as like aggressive, sort of message oriented rock that's sort of, anti accessibility, kind of like what hardcore is and stuff like that. I connect with the anger of the women's side of it more than I do from the men's side, interestingly enough, even though obviously I am a man. And I think like Kurt Cobain famously did too, right? Like that
Hmm.
he really saw a lot in it. And I do get it a lot better now as to what he was seeing, because whereas sometimes hardcore can just, like anybody, I like to fucking smash stuff and get angry and yell and scream and stuff as much as anybody, right? And feel music that way. But there was a level with like hardcore where it was sort of like, whoa, like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think we need to go quite that far, and I'm not quite that freaking angry. You know what I mean? Like, I could dial it back a little bit. So like a little bit of like repressing the anger and then it coming out as you listen to it. I feel like that's the lane that women are in a little bit more when they're doing hardcore, and that I think I just find I connect a little bit more with the sensibilities of it, of hypocrisy and um like anger, but also having to live in the world and
Hmm.
take care of people, and the fact that you don't have all the answers. I feel like female Riot Girl and stuff has a little bit more shades of gray in it, where like I feel hardcore is a little bit like, here's what to think and what you do, like stuff
Yeah.
straight edge, like great intensity that sometimes can be like othering for me a little bit. So that was kind of my first takeaway. I love the fact that some of these songs did have some undergirding of traditional structure, you know what I mean, in the way that good punk does sometimes, that it's so sort of lo-fi and loose and sounds like it's recorded on a at-home tape recorder. I think
Yep.
famously, like Kathleen Hanna, that's what she wanted Julie Ruin to sound like a girl like recording something in her bedroom and stuff. And this has that vibe too of feeling like trying to mirror, some of the songs are live and it tried to mirror kind of the aggression you'd feel. And I definitely feel like this was, you go and for like 45 minutes to an hour, you just rage, and then you're like, all right, I feel better and now I'm back in the world. You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
kind of like go back to like your life, and then you have these small outbursts along the way. Whereas I feel like hardcore was just a simmering anger every day at all times. At some points, like self-destructive a little bit along the way. That sort of did keep me at a distance. You were right that this shares some similarities for sure, sonically and thematically, with Bratmobile. It shares some similarities too with Liz Phair, in terms of a version of feminism that has definitive feminine traits mixed with definitively what would be considered to be like anti-feminine traits, and sort of a space where it's like, I want the ability to veer between these identities like as it fits, and
Hmm.
like there's nothing wrong with me not always being one identity or the other. You kind of can't put me in a box. And
Yeah.
the interesting relationship of like with sex, where it's sort of like, I want to be in control at sometimes but submissive at others. I want the ability, right, you know what I mean, to sleep with who I want to, and have casual sex but also have relationship sex. Also, I don't want the violence with it and the uncomfortability and the power imbalance, that the gender politics, right, that have
Right.
to do with things like abortion or sex or domestic violence or all the different stuff. And I don't know, maybe it's because some of my worldview connects with it a little bit. Like, I just found myself connecting thematically with the aggression and this anger a lot more. And so as a result, it was a thumbs up for me, because it didn't overstay its welcome. And it gave me the right amount of aggression. And I definitely benefited from hearing some aggressive music this week. Like I needed an outlet, and I was able to sort of pour myself into it. And I also, there will be albums some weeks where I'm like, the ability for me to listen and understand this album is so much better because of doing a podcast. And I always appreciate when, I have the background of listening to the things that lead up to this and the context outside of just listening to this album sort of as is, where I don't know if I would have got it quite as much. So
Yeah.
there
I
you
think
go.
I hear what you're saying, John, about the kind of responding to the female perspective more. I think for me, or what I respond to, at least with Bikini Kill and Bratmobile, is that they're more articulate and coherent, and I think they have maybe a bit more narrative structure in their songs. It's easy to kind of understand what they're talking about, whereas I feel like in some hardcore it's just like it's like a volcano of emotions, and they're just like yelling words without like really
What's
like,
a lot like TV sucks, rotting your brain. TV sucks. Like it's like it
Right.
does, but
it's not like as it's more abstract in that sense, and I always respond to the narrative more.
Well, they almost have,
and mixed with direct aggression, like
Yeah.
suck my left one. You know what I
but
mean?
they
Yeah.
have. It's almost like they have more of a reason to be pissed, like a more legitimate reason to be pissed off.
Yeah.
That is kind of like hard to deny, because you're talking about centuries of like,
Right.
women just being treated as second class citizens, or, just all the stuff that they've had to go and still have to go through. Right. It's not like, Bikini Kill came out with this record and then like, all those issues are solved. Right. Like,
Right.
In fairness, though, a lot of the guys in hardcore had trauma in their lives, like came from broken homes and stuff like that. So I wouldn't necessarily say they don't have reasons to be pissed. It's just different, like societal critique is easier.
It's different, but like, whereas not every male grew up in a broken home, every female has had to deal
Yeah,
right,
or some
with
sort
like
of,
a
like,
patriarchal society, right? So
Right.
no matter how good you can have a great upbringing, but you can still get sexually accosted, or you could get
Right, I hear
talked
you.
down to, or all
Yeah.
that stuff. So it's a more, every woman has to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Okay, that's a good point. But yeah, at least that's what I hear. Maybe you're trying to articulate as well.